Phil here. Really interested in hearing Dame Elizabeth's view.
And we are recording, I hope now it's flashing. Okay, so welcome everybody to our webinar for this evening. Nikki, you're going to, I'm Colette Chapman, sorry, I'm on the national board of the BACCN and moderating this session tonight.
Okay, so welcome everybody. I'm Nikki Credland, I'm chair of the BACCN and joint hosting this with Colette this evening. So I just want to say thank you very much for joining us for our webinar talking about Black and ethnic minority nurses within the critical care environment. And I would like to introduce you to our three esteemed guests who are going to impart their wisdom to us tonight. So if we can maybe start with Professor Dame Elizabeth.
Thank you very much indeed, and it's a huge honour to be invited to this session. My name's Elizabeth, and my background, oh, by the way, one thing I'm going to say is I'm 73. Now, the reason I'm saying that is that I think it's only fair on the audience to know how far back I was working in the National Health Service. I retired in 2007, but as has already been mentioned, my area of speciality in the latter third of my career was sickle cell. And therefore, because at times I'm thinking, why am I involved with critical care nursing event? And then of course I thought, well, yes, of course. In my own experience, I was never a critical care nurse. So I think I just wanted to put that on the table. Whereas our other two esteemed panelists definitely are critical care nurses. So, but my observations will obviously be particularly drawn from my memories of being involved, and particularly as the first sickle cell nurse specialist in this country. And I've obviously still retained a particular interest in particularly the experiences of Black nurses, but minority, all nurses obviously, but particularly minority nurses. And therefore I hope I will be able to offer something in that respect. Thank you.
Calvin, do you want to go next?
Sorry, I was unmuting. Great, thank you so much, Elizabeth and Nikki, Colette, Nordia, to share this platform. So I'm Calvin, I'm a nurse, obviously, critical care background. Actually, Elizabeth and I crossed paths way back in 2000 and probably one at what used to be Thames Valley University, back then in Ealing. And then, you know, so Elizabeth's a good friend, mentor, and everything else I could say wonderful about her. And just to say, to just clarify really, so I trained here in London, or qualified here in England rather, in Essex as a nurse, and I got all of my critical care nursing experience at Guy's and St. Thomas's. So I owe a lot to GSPT. And I was really supported by a group of mainly women, and I'll talk about that a little later on and the role we have in allies. I now work in higher education, but I still practice as a nurse. And one correction, and something we'll talk again later on about, is that I'm actually an associate professor. As far as I am aware, there are no male Black professors of nursing from the Caribbean. There may be male Black professors, but none from the Caribbean. So just to get it right, I'm an associate professor. And that's something we'll talk about later on again, when we start looking at promotions and going up the ladder. What's that like when you start to progress in your career? But I'll leave that there for now.
Thank you very much, Calvin. And last but absolutely not least, the lovely Nordia.
Well, hello everyone, and thank you for inviting me as well, and a pleasure meeting you both, both Dame Elizabeth, Professor, and Calvin. So just a little bit brief background of myself. So like you probably, Calvin, I'm from the Caribbean as well, beautiful sunshine country of Jamaica. And I came here and trained at Hertfordshire University as a registered nurse. So since qualifying 16 years ago, I've always done critical care nursing. And now, well, you've been to Thames Valley, but I actually did most of my training in Ealing. So exactly, so that's where I started off my journey in as a nurse. But also to add with you, Professor, I've actually got sickle cell trait as well. So, so that's also another commonality with the panel, I guess. But I'm currently working at Guy's and St. Thomas now as a practice development nurse, and I've been doing this role for the last 8 years. So, you know, it's really, I'm really passionate about developing others. So that's why I've kind of went down the education route as well, but just not have gone into the university arena, because I still want to stay a bit close to clinical practice. So I think that is more or less me in a nutshell, to try and summarize me, because there's a lot more to me than meet the eye, I guess.
Brilliant, thank you very much indeed. Okay, so I'm going to hand over to Colette just to do some techie housekeeping things, because I'm hopeless at it.
Thanks, Nikki. I'm hoping I've covered it already, but just to reiterate, anyone new that's joined us, we're going to put some pre-thought through questions from Nikki and myself to the panel. Calvin's going to start off, and then either Nordea and Elizabeth, and they might swap around. And then after their chance to chat, it will have an opportunity. So please put questions in the question and answer section. And also hopefully we'll be able to unmute and you'll be able to put your questions directly within to the panel over the course of the next 40 minutes or so. So without further ado, Nikki, are you going to pose the first question, or would you like me to?
Yeah, no, I am indeed. So I'm going to start at the question to Calvin to start with, if that's all right. And I'm just interested to hear yourself and the other panelists' experiences of being a Black nurse within the NHS and within education.
Sorry, when my finger goes up, it means I'm unmuting. Okay, yeah. When you see the finger goes up, I'm unmuting. I'm sorry. Thank you, Nikki. So if anyone ever was interested, and it sits at the university's repository where I did my doctorate, University of East London and the British Library, you'd seen the first chapter of my doctorate. I said why I was interested in culture as impacting on health, because I did my nursing at the University of Essex in Colchester. In 1995, I qualified as a nurse. And so that gives me a lot of years of experience. But one of my colleagues, and she was a fellow Trinidadian, she took me to the high street in Colchester. I'll keep this very brief. And she said, look around and tell me what you see. And I said, I see the trees, I see the castle park, it's lovely. I see an old, she said, what else do you see? I see a woman in a pushchair with her child. I see this woman. And she said, come on, Calvin, really, what are you not seeing? What are you seeing? And I said, Shell, tell me, what do you want me to see? She said, we're the only 2 Black people here. Have you not realized that? And she then started, because you know she wore braids and everything else, and she said, I have to go to London to get my hair done. I have to do this. And then it really played on me. And then I had a Black patient. And people just didn't understand. And there was this Black young woman, and again it was about hair care. And I got it, and other people didn't. And that really made me interested in culture and how we offer culturally sensitive care. So I qualified and I had my nurse education in a very predominantly, I think there were 5 of us who were from ethnic minority groups in my cohort. And so I had to learn to deal with that, but it also positioned me to understand culture a bit better and how we become culturally sensitive and what cultural intelligence is. But the moment I qualified, I moved to London, because London was where it was very diverse and cosmopolitan, and I had a mix and I fit in. And as I said, I worked at Guy's and Tommy's, and I was supported by a wonderful group of senior nurses there, you know, all the Maggies and all the Heidi's of the world, such as I used to call it, because we had more than one. And I love Guy's and Tommy's for that. They really gave me my foundation in critical care nursing. But then I left and I went to do a doctorate at one point, and I was doing agency nursing, just to link with you and some of the things as a Black nurse. So I was very well respected within a permanent position as a clinical nurse. When I started doing agency nursing, I found it, and probably I was at Guy's, but I wasn't aware of it, but I found it a lot more discriminating. So I would walk into an intensive care, my background of cardiac ITU, and people will really quiz you as though you know nothing. And I had to actually say once to a nurse, I said, you know where I come from? these ventilators, we have them in the museum because they're so old. So don't think I can't use it, but I could explain to you about lung and capacities and, you know, volumes if that's what you want me to tell you. But it's the fact that people start judging you and they quiz you to see what you know. And I think also, having been a senior nurse, as senior nurses, we do know we have to maintain patient safety and we have to monitor the staff that come through our doors, but there are ways of doing it. And there are subtle ways as senior nurses, when we're really experienced, we walk around, we can tell who's struggling and who's not. But then we can also walk around and tell, like, I'm gonna make sure this, it really felt like it. Black nurses at the time, we were doing agency. We were really in a cadre of people that were only here to get the money. You didn't want to really work, you were lazy. And that's a stigma I think probably still exists to some day in clinical practice that I still come across. Because I still practice clinically, and the moment there's another Black nurse, I see nurses back go up and they're really scrutinizing that person more than they would their white colleague. I'm going to leave that there clinical practice. Probably I could come back to education later because other members in the panel may want to pick up.
That's really interesting, and I know Helena's kind of commented in the chat as well that your comments have resonated with her. And I must admit, I can think of some times when I've worked clinically that we've had agency nurses, Black agency nurses that work with us, and I can actually recall certain instances where I've probably witnessed that kind of behaviour from the nurse in charge of the units that I've worked on as well. That's a really interesting. I've not really given that much thought, to be honest. It's really interesting. Nordea or Dame Elizabeth, do you want to pick up on that? What are your experiences of being a Black nurse within the NHS?
I mean, I can probably contest with that one. Not, you know, it's similarities with you, Calvin, but I've always been in London. So in terms of multiculturally, I've not really seen that. However, what I've noticed though is when I started off my nursing career after qualifying in 2004, and I was working in Ealing Hospital, it was just obvious to see that even though it was, you know, the area that it serves is like a lot of Asian population because of the area of London it is. However, when you look at band 5 and band 6s, we're always, you know, reflecting off the environment. But when you look at band, you know, band 7 and band 8 above, you really always see white people. And I always question that anyway, to say what is so different with us of color from not getting those positions, but it's not reflecting the population. So it's not even, to be honest, we're a white against another ethnic minority. It's about, I've always observed that wherever you're working, the positions or people in positions should actually reflect the population that it serves. And that has always been a case where I've tend to observe. And I do get the point where you said, you know, in the Caribbean, you're not looking at color, you're not looking at anything, you're just going about in the merit of your skin. So you're just so oblivious to all these things. And then when you come and hit and realize that, hang on a second, there is disparity in, you know, in that, and whether or not it's conscious or unconscious bias, it's just one of those things. Sometimes it's conscious, but then sometimes it's just unconscious. And to pick up in terms of with agency nurses or even nurses in general, you take handover from a Black person and they tend to scrutinize your work a lot more than when you'd actually, you know, than a white colleague or a counterpart. They're usually like, you know, it's fine, I'll get on with it. Don't worry about it, you can go home. Whereas somebody else would need to stay back and complete those tasks. So those are some of the things that I've actually observed as well, working clinically. So yeah, but it's just those things that I've observed in terms of those key little points. Have I been directly discriminated against? I don't think so, because it's not really been, you know, in my face. So I can't actually comment on that, but there are little micro stuff, micro racism where, you know, you'll speak and they'll say, oh, you know, you don't sound like you're from Jamaica because you're well spoken. Or you don't look Jamaican. So I'm like, how does a Jamaican actually look? You know, so all these things and that you'll actually hear, and then they'll be talking about a conversation openly about, you know, a particular culture, but then they're like, oh yeah, but you're different. And I'm like, but how can you actually be comfortable in these sort of setting which have actually gotten those things, and it's those little micro aggression kind of thing that really pops out often. And it kind of makes no wonder in general people like of color tend not to go for certain positions, because they don't think that they're actually will fit in into the status quo. And even I've heard, and some of the things that a Black colleague will probably tell another Black person, you will never ever hear it. So, and some positions people only see a particular color in there, and they don't think that they can actually apply for it. Because I've even heard a nurse said to me, you know, I was quite shocked that there was a Black person who just joined the ECMO team, because they didn't think that they, you know, Black people was in ECMO team. So I was like quite shocked by that, but that is something that is a perception. So that is a, you know, other colleagues' perception of how race, and, you know, you're not actually relating, you can't relate to a position because you don't see anybody in there look like you. So that is, you know, a lot of these things that we just need to start talking about, the elephant in the room, and making the uncomfortable conversations really comfortable, because it's these things that if you want integration, you actually need to be open and honest and just say, I do not know or understand a particular culture. Because even within the Black culture, we still have variations of culture. Because I cannot say I understand African culture because I've never brought up like that. And I remember even having a conversation with a colleague of mine that was Ghanaian. And, you know, we sometimes have hand gestures. And I was like pointing like this. And she was like, oh, that is so disrespectful. But for me, it was just me having that kind of rapport. So it's just even within the, you know, a particular race, we have to still understand where people are coming from. You know, and some of the things is like, why is it only if a Black person shows emotions, you're deemed as aggressive? You know, but when a white person shows emotions and is shouting, they're like, no, they're okay to express their emotions and their feelings. So all these things, you know, that really puts you into a box to say, I cannot speak. You're always conscious of what comes out of your mouth, not to offend somebody else, because you're actually wanting to not fit into a typical stereotype. And that is what it is like, how do we get rid of this preconceived ideas of what a particular person is supposed to sound like or look like? Because I'm sure none of my white colleagues every day is worrying about what comes out of their mouth and how it comes across. But as a Black person, you're constantly being reminded of that. And you're having to shut down your thought process just because you don't want to come across a certain particular way, you know? So I don't know if anybody else has experienced that or have actually had conversations with, you know, your colleagues, but it actually is something that is genuine.
That's really interesting. And I guess that goes about racism being overt, that we see on the news and we see in social media and we see in the papers, and we've certainly seen examples of in America over the last few months. And we're probably reasonably well aware of that, maybe. But I suppose it's the covert racism that we don't see, and that as white people, we probably don't realise exists, that you've explained to us, you know, makes such a difference to how you behave in your day-to-day life, how you communicate with people, how you know, continue your work relationships, etc. Dame Elizabeth, do you want to come in and give us some words of wisdom now?
You're going to get an historical perspective, because I'm very, 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 very old, okay? And so I'm 73 years of age, and I was born and brought up in Britain, in England. And I'm mixed race. My mother was of Irish heritage, born in this country. My father was Nigerian. They weren't married. They were both students at Cambridge University when they met. Now, I lived in care for the first 9 years of my life in Birmingham. My mother never wanted to have me adopted, but it was very difficult for her to provide a family for me. So I'm just giving you that little bit of context. And I'm going to pull from some stories I wrote in my memoirs to explain how somebody like me who, come on, I've achieved a lot. I've had a good life in nursing, but I want to go back and try and explain more, I think, maybe from a psychological point of view, because I'm in a position where I was able to write very freely. I'd retired. I wasn't employed anywhere. I was free to be as honest as I could be in my memoirs. So the first thing I want to reflect on is that a big memory I have is when I was about 4 or 5. I was the only child of colour in the convent until I was 8. Now we're talking about the late 40s and the 50s, the 1950s, just to put it in context. I remember washing my face 10 times with red Lifebuoy soap to try and be white like my friends, and I ended up in sick bay. Now I'm just telling you that because if a child does something like that, and occasionally you still hear stories of this, we're starting to explain why we realize that we're not always accepted in the country where we live or where we were born or where we work. So there's that issue of, are we accepted on the basis of our skin color, purely on the basis of our skin color? So that's number one. The second point would be to shoot forward now to when I applied to be a nurse, to do my nurse training as it was then. We're talking about 1965. I would have applied around 1964. I'd have been about 17. Now, at this stage, I didn't know who my father was. I did, thank goodness, meet him later in life. That's another story. So I had my mother's maiden name, and I made 4 applications to 4 London teaching hospitals. And it was interesting that they all asked very similar information in those days. They wanted to know the name of my father, blank. They wanted to know his occupation, blank. They also wanted a photograph of me. Now I had 7 O-levels, which wasn't bad for, I was 16 when I left school. None of those teaching hospitals replied back to me. Now, this is an issue. Why wouldn't, is it really racism? I'm not even bothering to ask the question. I'm just giving you the story for you to make of it what you want. So that's that. And the other story I want to tell you as a child was when I was asked by very well-meaning people probably, where are you from, my dear? Birmingham? And I had a real Midlands accent, I can tell you. Birmingham? No. Where are you really from? Birmingham. And I could see the annoyance on the faces. And of course, you know, we all ask. I don't honestly think there's a problem in asking where a person is from, as long as there's a positive reason for asking that question. If it's to really identify that you're from outside, that's a well, it's not always negative. What is irritating and is, as far as I'm concerned, my experience is racist, is when you are challenged on the answer that you give. So I'm saying I'm from Birmingham. No, you can't be from Birmingham. And of course, as a child, you don't understand. But why I'm giving these stories is it built in me a deep-seated anger. And I think it's very important that all of our colleagues really understand that there is anger. I think actually, regardless of what race you are, what ethnicity you are, you probably have some anger, deep-seated anger. And if all of us could psychologically be aware of what are those pockets of anger that we carry with us from our childhood probably, it took me a long time to recognize. And actually, I'll tell you when it was, when I read President Barack Obama's memoirs, Dreams from My Father, because somebody else pointed out to him, he must be very angry about his upbringing for some reason. And he reflected on that and realized, yes, he had bottled up quite a lot of anger. But what I would say is that what I was pleased at, again, reflecting on where my career took me, why did it take me? Why did I succeed? I think it was because I've used my anger very positively. Anger can be very negative. Anger can eat you up. And I think when we're talking about, let's just talk about Black nurses. We've heard examples already this evening. multiple acts of negativity based on skin colour can have a very negative effect on the individual and can eat up that individual to the end up with negative mental health outcomes. So I think we should all be aware of people who are seen as other. What is that causing them? And could that be part of the explanation of, we heard about so-called aggression, negative behaviour as perceived by others? Could it be that it's this anger that's been bottling up inside individuals and every so often erupts in a particular situation that that individual finds himself? Because basically in our brains we're going, oh, not again. Please just accept us for who we are. If we've done something that is inappropriate in our nursing practice, that's something else. We all have to be brought to account. But if it's based on, expectations that you will do this as a black person, etc., then that's it. So sometimes I think we feel we're walking on eggshells. I think Nordea has alluded to that. So I would just like to finish on just a couple of points. There was a friend, when I wrote my memoirs, I interviewed 30 people who have known me throughout my life. And one of them was a friend I trained as a nurse with. So we've known each other 40 odd years. And she told me a story I'd never realized. She said that when we were both student nurses in our third year, and I was doing very well, I was passing all the exams, I was even winning some prizes, my friend Janet pondered to herself, isn't it a shame that Elizabeth is not going to get far in nursing? Why did Janet think that? Because we've already, when she looked around at who were the ward sisters, as they were then, all white. And so my white friend, worried about me and as to whether now it was in the late 60s. And when I've told that story, I get feedback from many people. Elizabeth, that's still an issue. That's still an issue. And finally, I specialized in sickle cell. I look back, I was never taught about sickle cell in my nurse training. 1965 to 1968, in Paddington, West London, nobody taught us about sickle cell disease. Now, I'm sure, hopefully that is changing. So there have been a couple of campaigns. How white is my curriculum? And how black are my professors? In other words, why are we not addressing the educational needs of our student nurses to reflect the care that they're going to give to the multicultural population, the diverse populations that they're giving? And so that would be the last, but the last one actually is related to critical care. I remember, I think it was in the 1970s, reading a short item in The Guardian about a child that died in the northeast of England following a tonsillectomy. And the nurse was called to order. She was called for a disciplinary hearing because it was noted there was an argument of neglect on the case of that nurse. And her defense was she didn't realize that the child was bleeding internally, and that was the cause of death for that young child. She didn't realize because the child was brown. And I remember reading that and feeling so angry because I'm not a critical care nurse, I'm a nurse. So immediately what comes to mind is, excuse me, did you take that child's pulse? Were you monitoring that child's respiration? Or the observations you would do on a child following this off. And to have that the excuse was that the child was brown skinned, so she couldn't recognize pallor. That's what she was saying. Now, you could argue maybe she did have but no, there are other ways of recognizing that that child is deteriorating. And so I think these are areas that have always influenced me in are we equitably treating our patients? Thank you.
Wow, thank you very much indeed. I'm at a slight loss of how to follow that. That's certainly a huge pause for thought, and certainly as an academic, the sentence of many that resonated with me was, how white is my curriculum and how black are my professors? And that's very interesting, because I'll hold my hands up and say we have no black professors. In fact, I can only think off the top of my head of 2 black lecturers that we have. That's really, yeah, really given me pause for thought, definitely. Colette, is there anything that you'd like to come in and comment on?
I mean, yes, thank you, Nikki, and thank you to our panelists. I think it's us starting to really think about this now. My thought, we all wanted to have this webinar, but my thought was, I'm starting to look at the BACCN because I can influence that. I'm also looking at I was talking to Nordea earlier today, my team of simulation educationalists. The nursing interest is so interesting. The fellows that come forward reflect our medical and our patient diversity. But the nurses that come forward into my Band 7 clinical educator roles are predominantly white, and the people I have in my team right now are white, and I want us to start changing that. And I think I would like to ask you, if you can, to help me start thinking of ways that I best do that. Now, clearly my organisation has got approaches, but from your experiences, that would be a really lovely question. And just to let you know that the world of simulation educationalists are trialling and are starting to challenge themselves on this. I was just on a webinar with the Harvard colleagues just the other day, and they had a panelist, a Black and Asian group of colleagues who were saying that instead of just having psychological safety, we now need to have identity safety, and it would be really helpful if their phrase was to not have colour blindness, but to openly make race discussable within our simulation debriefs. And I suppose I want to do that, but I'm worried to make the wrong comment, and I just wondered what your thoughts are on that.
Could I go first for a bit? So I was making a couple notes, so I'm just going to look at my phone while we're talking. I think when we look at representation on panels, and we look at how people get there, that's key to representing an organization. And as Nadia identified earlier on, we're always, and it's like Klein said, Roger Klein in his 2014 Snowy White Peaks, we are still there. But one of the things that I've always said is, those of us who worked in nursing and healthcare, we transferred to the universities, and that same practice and mentality that we had in the NHS widely have moved with us. So when we talk about this, when Roger Klein talks about the snowy white peaks of the NHS, it's really just moved to the snowy white peaks of HEIs, higher education institutions. So I think we need to look at how we do that and how we move beyond that, because those bad practices have followed us. And universities are wonderful places for seat of learning and changing. It is brilliant. I mean, I enjoy education, and that's what we should do. But when the nursing, and we're talking particularly nursing, when the nursing group moved to become part of the faculty, we carry those bad practices. So for example, I am very open, and I know I may be slapped in the face for this in a couple of weeks, but I will say it. I applied for my full professorship. And when you're talking about supporting people to develop, I said to the department that I worked in, I would like to have a BME mentor. When I was not appointed, I said, I need someone who understands me and know what happened. And it took them 9 months to come back to me and say, we found you someone. And it was a white male in the department who I had nothing in common with and I could identify. But what that signifies is as you pointed out, Nikki, the faculty don't have the leadership representation at that level, you know. So I had to go outside and find my own BME mentor. So that's one. But what we do know as nurses in the NHS and as lecturers or academics, there is this, when we talk about cultural approach to promotion, that happens. So you are going to apply, put an application in. I will talk to you on the side. And it's very done culturally among, and I use the term nothing racist, but it's very done culturally among white groups. We will go out for a drink. We will have coffee or tea in the canteen. And I will help you get that application right. Send it over to me by email. I will tell you what to look for. And the next thing you hear, oh, you know, Colette has now been made professor. And you're like, but Colette just got here 6 months ago. And I've been here like 5 years and I've been trying. But there's the mechanics in getting an application right. We all know that. Just like when you submit a paper to a journal, there are mechanics. And we don't know those cultural mechanics because we're not brought up in this system. And even if we are, we've been made on the outside of the system. So our organizations, you really need to look at how those cultural approaches change. And one way is by having fellowships and schemes. Targeting specifically, so say to your BACCN, you know, say, you know what, actually, we want to target that we have an ethnic minority representation. We want people from Band 5 to do a one-year fellowship with us. We want people who are at the doctoral level from BAME background to become an assistant editor or trainee assistant editor for 18 months or a year. Because we know they're doing a doctorate, it's a lot of work, but this is part of their scholarship in writing and learning about research as well. So within your organization, you're beginning to change the face by just developing these sort of schemes that work. And it's the same thing in clinical practice. You know, we get, just like in academia, I mean, we do the dog's work in academia. We do a lot of the teaching, the BME staff. The other staff get to go from the conferences and apply for their research grants. I have to teach like 5 modules and try and put in a grant in and get a paper out. My other colleagues don't probably have to do as much as I do in that respect. But and it's the same thing in the clinical setting. Some of your colleagues get to become the such and such champion or the whatever, and you are just left here to do everything else. So it's about identifying talent. But not just identifying talent, looking beyond skin color. It's looking at the individual's worth and what they can bring to the table. But it should not have taken the death of one man and several others in America to actually bring us to this point of conversation. But hey, I'm happy we are here and we're having this dialogue. And I think when you go back and you talk to your groups and your people, we have to look at fragility. There's fragility on either side. And Nadia touched on that a bit. I don't understand every ethnic minority culture there is and their nuances. And there is also within Black people, there'll be fragility, and with our white colleagues, there'll be fragility. Because if you invite me to the table to tell you what I think, and then you get really upset, then I'm like, well, why did you bring me here? You know, I've spoken, and now you're saying, you know, we're all going to step down from the board. We're all going to move away on my terms, you know. And this is the other thing, you know, probably on your board, you need to start having terms in terms of years, how long someone is in term for this position. So it rotates. And that actually develops your ethnic minority staff who are on board to actually feel, well, I'm not just here for the tick box exercise. And I'll end this really quickly because I think Nadia may want to come in because she may have experiences in clinical practice. In higher education, certainly when we have the Black student or the BME student, I use Black broadly, okay, just to encompass everyone. When we have the Black student who has to go towards fitness for practice, that's when they look for the Black academic to sit on the panel. So we are almost taxed as Black people. I am taxed because I am Black, because then the student cannot say, well, you know, it was an all-white panel. And I'm like here, and I'm like feeling really guilty because I see the student perspective, I do understand it. But if I talk up now, I also know in the back of my head, my white colleagues have brought me here because of my skin color to make this equal. So I think we have to really look at how we're taxed as Black people as well. So this is really good conversation we're having, but it's open conversations we need to have. Because sometimes as Black people, we feel we're taxed because of the color of our skin. To represent the universities, the organizations, the NHS organizations, healthcare organizations we call, they should have, because we're so much BME people in healthcare, we should have pools of people we can call on that we've trained to do this, not just have one at every point. You know, and then the other things is, even when they do have you on a panel, you do the first stage panel, but not the second. So, you know, so like, you know, if I go for an interview as a professor, the people who I present to as a presentation panel, that's all the BME people be there. When I go into the other panel, the main panel that counts with the leadership, it's all white. And it's like, what's that about? You know, so I think those are some of the things we need to look at when you're looking at changing. But I don't know if anybody else wants to come in.
Really, really interesting. Elizabeth, I wonder if I can be rude enough to draw on your many years of expertise to ask what improvements you've seen, if you've seen any, over the years that you've been involved in nursing. Do you think we're going in the right direction?
Very slowly, yes. There's certainly been improvements. The fact, I think Calvin's already alluded to it, the fact that you're having this sort of panel today, and yes, it's sad that these issues have really come to the fore through deaths or in whatever country. And but, you know, we have to use every opportunity, however sad and poignant that opportunity is. So where do I see the improvements? Whereas my friend was worried as to whether I would ever become a ward sister, if you look at the hierarchy in nursing, for example, you can certainly start to see an increase in the percentage of Black and minority individuals at higher levels in nursing. But still, when you look at the top levels, we've got the issue. And also, people have to accept that there's a heck of a lot of complexity in this. And if they really want to be part of the change as white colleagues, white leaders, they have to understand that it is complex. And there are issues in terms of which minority ethnic individuals are getting promoted in the system and which are not. And if that is not on the table, because that is something that would, you said there are certain things we talk about as a Black group. That, I can tell you, that's one of the things we talk about. So, and I understand why there has been a discussion about certain people not liking the term BAME or Black and minority ethnic individuals. However, I'm not actually too bothered about it. What I'm more interested in is, in any organization or in any association such as your own, how do you link in with the thousands of Black and whatever we want to call those individuals who are there in the system? They're there. So some uncomfortable actions need to be taken. When I say uncomfortable, it may mean reallocation of resources to actually really work on this issue for the next 5 years. I'm not saying it'll be solved in 5 years, but I noticed in the comments, some very interesting comments, by the way. It's not enough to talk about this issue. It's not enough to, I think that was one. The other issue, which was really interesting for me, is the comments that people have been making about how it's only recently that there's been the start of non-white, simulation mannequins. Now that in itself, when you think of, this is a core tool, surely. I mean, I've never taught it, but I know it must be a core tool. So we have to accept that the neglect and the lack of representation in mannequins, goodness me, you know, is part and parcel of lack of representation within the upper echelons of the National Health Service. And it's called racism, whether people like it or not. It doesn't bother me. I'm old now, you know. And because I've seen that once people accept these uncomfortable facts about ourselves, our colleagues, and genuinely want to address these issues. And already in the comments, there have been some excellent suggestions as to how this can be addressed both within your association, but within the NHS as well. As far as I'm concerned, every manager should know which of their staff, and they will have white, they'll have black, they'll have Asian, they'll have Chinese, they'll have all sorts of individuals. Which of their staff feel that they are not achieving their career, what they want to attain in their career? Now that is hard work on the part of the manager. I have been a manager in higher education, and I was managing, I think it was 63 lecturers. And when I arrived, I interviewed every single lecturer over my first 2 months. Listen, that was exhausting. I was knackered when I got home. But one of the reasons I did it was to find out how happy are the individuals I'm managing within this organization. Do they feel that they could do more? Do they feel they've been blocked? What do they want to do? And why haven't they achieved it? Those were uncomfortable conversations at times. But at least at the end, I knew which of those individuals felt that they could have achieved more and were unhappy in the organization because they felt discriminated against for a variety of reasons. That's what managers have to get off their backsides, excuse the expression, and get a handle on this issue. Because if they don't know which of their members of staff feel that they're not being nurtured, that they've not had that tap on the shoulder, as we've talked about, they've got a disgruntled member of staff for a start. And that is going to affect not only that individual, but the quality of care that they are providing for either their patients or their students, etc. So I just give that as an example from my own experience. Thanks.
Oh, thank you, Elizabeth. I really want to make sure Nordea has time to come in and respond. I just want to check in with everyone. It's 2 minutes to 8. Are we all okay to just go for another 10 minutes? Because there are a couple of questions in the chat. I know Nordea's got to go home because you're still at work physically. We really want to give you that chance to come in. So if you come in and then we can go to the 2 questions in the chat, if that's okay, in the Q&A section. So Nordea, please comment, as I know you've been waiting politely. Thank you.
Yes, hold on a second. I was just trying to read the chat. But very good points. But one, I'm just going to try and be very controversial here, is that I've got a little thing, is like, is there a myth that we can only move through the banding in sequence from a BAME perspective, or can we skip band and just go straight to, as long as we've got the correct qualifications? Because at the moment, I'm looking at it and saying, I've got a master's in education, but then there's something that kind of holds you back from applying for certain jobs. But then I was watching a YouTube video with this Black girl who was born in the US, and she lives in Japan from she was 2 years old. And she was talking about they have a day where it comes with looking at color of their skin. And she said she didn't feel, they don't see color, but they see individuals. And they have one where they make a portrait of themselves. And she said the teacher, she was the only darkest skin color in that class, but the teacher made sure that she actually got the right color shading of a crayon to just make sure it represents who she is. So she's not, feel out of place. And I think that is really, really key, because when you're looking at how do we involve equality and diversity and try and building, developing our staff from a BAME background, is about, first we need to make sure that people can see that these jobs are achievable. And not just applying for a job because of lip service. And I think that is one of the key things where a lot of us as BAME thinking, why am I going to even bother applying for that position because my skin doesn't fit, right? But then also is that back to SIM is about looking at, because I'm part of SIM as well in a different from critical care perspective. But it's looking at bringing in things to say the color of the skin, how pallor, because, you know, we tend to look at pink. It's not everybody color is going to be pink, you know, especially if you're actually of a darker complexion. But also looking at starting looking at leadership development from band 5, and, you know, looking at that from PDRs, you know, for staff to start looking at what progression and how can we support them in terms of leadership, and offering these courses, and not having to wait until you're probably a band 7 or in a band 8 position before you start thinking of leadership, because by then it's too late. Because there was a poster from NHS that was driving past in terms of obesity, and it was showing a Black woman, which I'm presuming is African descent, and she had normal weight, not a skinny model that we usually tend to want to look at. And then she was eating a plate of jollof rice, okay? So it's reflecting her culture, but it was well proportioned. So it's just basically seeing that even though I'm from, or, you know, whatever background you are, or whatever your food content is, it's about showing that diversity, to say that as much as we're tackling obesity, for example, that's the NHS campaign, it's like seeing that this is doable to me and you're talking to me. But when you look at diet or you know, diversity in terms of stuff, it's like making it reflective of people, because too many times, and I've had experience in it, where you've got a Black manager, and that Black manager is used as a pawn to really discipline her Black colleagues, and no one, and even if they come across as bullying or harassing the staff, no one talks up about it, because they're saying, well, oh no, it's your countryman or it's your cultural person, and you're not looking at it from the right position. So you'll have, because I remember somebody was complained about harassment and bullying from their manager of Black, and they were both Black, but then when they complained, HR said, oh, it's the manager way of exerting her position of authority. And these things are really bad, because when you look at, you know, a white manager is afraid to tackle certain things when it comes to racism. But then when you have a Black manager now who's actually, you know, because they've never been taught properly. And I think these are some of the things we need to educate people of, you know, whatever position you're in, is to look at how can we support our staff, irrespective of the color of your skin, irrespective of where you're from, to make it equal. And I believe in terms of panel, to look at diversity training for panelist members, because when you're looking at interviewing panel, you cannot just have, okay, a token, I'm going to use this word, a token Black person just there because of lip service. So you're trying to hit that quota. It's a matter of how qualified are you in terms of looking at the right person for the right job. And if you have a candidate of equal qualification, but one is white and one is Black, who do you choose? So that's just my question to end the session with.
Thank you, Nordea. That's some powerful comments there, and really, really useful. For me to start really questioning myself, because that's where I have to start personally. I would wonder if, I don't know if Calvin, Elizabeth, or anyone has had a look at the questions. We can answer them live now, or we can type the answers, but David Muir posted a question as a middle-aged white RN, that's how he's described himself. Because we keep coming on age, I'm a bit worried about that. I'm middle-aged as well, or if not older than middle-aged now. But he talks about, at the very end of his commentary, it says he's had colleagues who, it's linked to people of colour phrase, and how would you react if you were told that the word Black is contentious? I don't know if Calvin or Elizabeth or Nordea wants to come in.
So I you know, I've come from a background of seeing terminology change over the years. The words used to describe minority individuals have a political connotation. And I remember the era of the 70s, 80s, 90s, where the use of the word Black would be explained in a much broader context in the way it was used. Things have got even more complicated, and I'm just getting to the point where if you don't like the word, just say you don't like the word and be comfortable with it, because you're never going to get it sorted out. And the fact is, obviously, and this is a very naive thought, but I'll just let's get it out. Isn't it sad that we're even having a discussion that, you know, we're worried about how we describe an individual? And that is because of the negativity that has surrounded this issue for individuals. So that those individuals, I think you were talking about growing up in the Caribbean, am I correct? Or maybe it was Calvin, sorry. But I've certainly heard people who've grown up in Nigeria, for example, who've come over here. And gosh, this issue about what am I going to be described as is very confusing. But the nature of our society, and, you know, we see incident after incident being reported in the media, which is related to race. So how is that, therefore, how is that individual described? Because it was because of this person's skin color that action happened against that individual. So when somebody's trying to just even talk about the incident, what are they going to say? And I don't think we'll ever get it right, actually. I have to be honest. I'm very comfortable with the term black, but I know other people may not be comfortable. I don't actually think we're ever going to solve this, to be quite honest. But if people can have the confidence to say how they wish to be described, that might be part of the solution. I don't know.
Thank you. Calvin, did you want to come into this?
Can't hear you.
Can you hear me now? Yeah, okay, great. I think there's two things, just to touch on what Elizabeth has said. It's always going to be contentious in terms of what people want to be called, but I think it's also respectful when I have a patient. So if Dame Elizabeth Professor was my patient and I see this wonderful title, I would say, hi, my name is Calvin, I'm your nurse. How can I call you? How would you prefer to be called? And I think, again, it's about having these open dialogue and conversation, that we need to start educating staff and people that it's okay to ask someone, how would you like, because I describe myself as male Black Caribbean. A lot of people look at me and say, but you're kind of like Indian looking, you know? And I'm like, you know what, if I show you the pictures of my family, I come from slave generation. So I see myself as Black Caribbean, you know? So it's not offensive to ask. I think it's polite. Just like how you'd ask your patient, how would you like to be called? You just say, I want to get this right, and I don't mean it in any way. And you shouldn't even have to apologize, but you say, in the context of things, tell me, how could I refer to you that I don't offend you? And, you know, I think Andrea Levy in Small Island really summed this up nicely in the very last pages of that book. Her daughter, she was going back to university in Kent, and the white woman was on the bus and said to her, and where are you from? And she said, London, I am British. And it ends the book. And that was Andrea Levy was talking about in Small Island. So it's the same thing as how people identify. You know, we have a very nice term in the IQ that I work on. We take the mick almost really. It's like, you know, when gay people started using the word queer positively, we go to the word, I'm British. And we take the mick. People say, where are you from? We say, I'm British. And, you know, it's become, but it's actually, we use something very negative that was turned around us, and we make it positive in the IQ that I work. So, you know, I think it's also how we use humor sometimes, or we use political words to make the positivity. But I think, just to say that, yes, Helena had asked a question. I have put it down as one of my objectives this year to set up a BAME National Doctoral Support Group, see what that looks like for upcoming doctoral students. I think my parting words for people are, find your ally. There are always allies. There are always people who are wanting to help. I think when you look at broadening, you know, go to your manager and say, I want to represent. And I think those of us who are managers and senior staff here, encourage junior people. Encourage them. Say, you know, you can do this. You know, I have like 7 PhD students at the moment, and only one of them, I think, is white English or white Irish. All the others are from Saudi Arabia, you know, Ghana, wherever. And it's also something that people went through. they identify with you and you understand culture. And I think what I'm trying to say is, for me in higher education, we have to understand where people are starting from. They may not come in with A levels. I'll be honest, I say to people, I never had A levels. My parents were too poor to send me to school to do A levels. Okay? So I was one of those people who got in nursing with 5 GCSEs. I went to school bare feet in primary school until I was able to go to secondary school, because my parents couldn't afford shoes. And that's why when you see me online and you see my shoes, Elizabeth knows all about my shoes, because that's part of my trajectory. But I think the part is, we should never be ashamed of our heritage and who we are. And we need to share that with our white colleagues and even our students from BAME background, to say, listen, we can achieve, but this is part of my narrative and who I am. And then people begin to understand us better. And that makes it open for dialogue and conversation. And just finally, I think we need to demystify these things about being on a board or a panel or becoming a senior leader. That should be within our reach. But it seems to be so far up there. You see my hands going all the way up there, that how do I become on that? But that sits within the power right now of certain leadership groups. So we need to demystify that and say to, if you look at some of the comments, we're saying, how can I become an academic lecturer? How can I become a researcher? We need to demystify that for people. And that lays with the current white leadership. They need to really look at, how do we, as I was saying, make fellowships, offer, 1 year internship to be an editor, and that will help people build their career, their CVs as well. And it builds their network. So I think we have to look at how we demystify some of those positions for people. Thank you.
And it feels like we need to do that across the board. In the BACCN, we certainly have been trying to reach out to demystify from the regions to the national board, and through actually virtual platforms like this, we've been able to connect closer to our regions than we ever have before. So on a different topic, it's the same thing about reaching out and talking, which is really powerful. Nordea, did you want to comment? Sorry, I've seen you've unmuted.
Yeah, just to add one final point, which I think is very, very important as well, because to be honest, over the years, I've always tried to seek mentors, but I've never really found a Black one. But that's fine, because I would just like to stress to people who are listening, and if you want to actually progress, do not be afraid to approach, regardless of their skin color. Because you'll find that you'll get more information, and you will actually, because just be bold, be confident. And even if you don't see somebody who within your little bubble, look outside, because you will get a wealth of information and a wealth of knowledge. So having a mentor is really, really important, because they see things that you don't actually see. Because one of the things that I've heard is that I undersell myself. And maybe it's from a cultural background as well, where you'll always hear to say self-praise is no recommendation, and let other people sing your praises and not you singing it yourself. So I've always struggled in terms of showing how great I am, and then that also sometimes come out in interviews when you go for a position and you're like, but how come that person got it when I've got all the qualifications, etc., etc. But I might have been shortlisted. And I think I'm probably a bit fortunate because my name sounds really English. So I'm not discriminated against that in the first hurdle. So that is also one thing as well, is about asking and not being afraid to ask. Because I've even approached, managers to say, how come you've only advertised certain position? What about me? What about my development? So you have to be very, very bold to go and ask about you. And not thinking that, because your development is your business. They don't care about you, because they're where, others are where they are. And it's who want to come, then they'll bring. So just be bold and find someone to literally mentor you.
Can I come in for 1 second? I am just going to say this. It just resonates with what you just said, Noria. I had a job interview about quite a few years ago at King's College, University of London, the Maxwell Clark building. And we were going to visit one of our friends who had a baby after, so my husband came with me and said, I'll sit and wait. And we were the only 2 people on the bench. And not once, but twice, two different members of the panel came out and apologized to him that they were running late for the interview. And when I went into the room, the first thing that people you could see they were shocked, and they said, "We value scholarship here at King's. Tell us what you believe in scholarship and what you see it to be." And I was like, okay, I answered the question, but I knew from the moment of that interaction, I was never going to get that job. Because in your head, you're already seeing a white person going to be this thing. And I was ashamed to say that was King's College London, happened many years ago. It's not naming and shaming, but just to say the reason why I'm saying it is because it actually happened. I literally went into a room and there were women with twin set pearls, seriously. And I was like, and I was made to feel so uncomfortable and big. And I was never questioning on my skills, but it was all about what I believe in scholarship is. And I wasn't as mature as I am now in academia to answer that fully. But those are the things we face. But just to see that he was wearing jeans and a pair of boots and I was wearing a suit, and you go up to him and say, "I'm sorry, not once, but twice. We're running late in the panel." And that just brings it home, some of the reality. And that's why I wanted to share that. It's about the reality that we actually do face it.
Thank you, Calvin. It feels like we've answered most of the questions within the question and answer panel. There is one anonymous request about sharing pearls of wisdom to build confidence. Maybe you could type the answer, Calvin, for that, as it's linked to someone's master's and PhD. I don't know. I feel like I'm just conscious that it's nearly 8:20 in the evening. If that's okay, I think we should come to a conclusion this evening. I've typed up some of the comments of what I've spelt our panel wrong. I do apologise, but summary points of mentorship, seeking allies, asking for help, asking for that development, opening the dialogue, opening the culture, and the language that we use. So I've put that in the chat as the sort of summary points that I heard from all of you this evening. And I wanted to just flag, I wasn't sure if it's Nikki or Karin, has very kindly put that a reminder of our BACCN. One of our specific awards was for a research grant, and the link is in the chat if anyone is interested. It's for an award of up to £2,000 to work on a BAME or people of colour type project. So the information is there for all our attendees this evening, and indeed for anyone to disseminate as well. There has been some Twitter chat for those of you that are on Twitter as well. I haven't managed to do all of that. I've been trying to keep my attention on the panel. I don't know if anyone would like any final words from our panel, and then if not, I'll let Nikki do the final close. Anybody? Elizabeth, Calvin?
I would just like to say thank you for having me. I think just to leave one thought, it's also something to do with social justice and social justice in nurses. As we know in the last pandemic, and Nikita, I think this is where you and I bonded when we talk about, we're heroes and so forth and that narrative. But we're also human beings, and there's a social justice element to nursing. And as someone from an ethnic minority group, you should also look at your staff within a social justice framework and see how you have that person, start off on a level playing field. But more so, thank you all for having me tonight. It was really great to have this conversation. And I hopefully what I shared would have helped some people. Elizabeth, it's always lovely to see you, as you know. Nadia, nice to meet you as well. And I think give my regards to Steve Malone when you see him. He's my great fella. Okay, I'm going to say thank you, but I'll keep answering questions online.
Okay. Can I just say congratulations to the association for putting on this webinar, and I'm sure it's going to be the first in many steps that you're taking, and I think you should actually set some targets and to ensure that your own leadership team becomes more diverse. And I gave you that example that you have to know who your members are, and then cascade from your members to other members so that you pull in a more diverse membership. It is hard work, but I think it's well worth it. But many, many congratulations on this. I found it very, very interesting, and good luck to everybody. Thank you.
Okay, so if I can just close then. So just maybe a couple of comments from me. I guess as the chair of the organisation, there are huge food for thought for me tonight. It's raised lots and lots of issues. I certainly want this to be something that we move forward, but I also want to move forward in a really thought-provoking, meaningful, and way that we can make change that is going to last over a long time. We don't want to just pay lip service to this issue. So we really need to work as a board to look at some strategies of how we can do that over the coming years ahead. And like Dame Elizabeth said, it's not something that we're going to be able to achieve overnight or in the next 5 years, and we need to have a strategic plan of how we're going to manage this over a period of time as one of the many responsibilities that we have as an organisation. So thank you very, very much indeed to our 3 panellists who have given us lots and lots to think about. It's been an absolute pleasure listening to you, and thank you very much to all of the delegates who have chosen to come along and listen to our webinar tonight. So massive thank you, good evening, and go and have a nice glass of wine now.
Yeah, thank you everybody. I will stop the recording, and that will be it. So thank you very much.
Thanks, bye. Bye-bye.